Ford's all-new FG Falcon is a big step forward for Aussie-made large cars. But the big question is, what are the sports models like? Well, Ford has three in the range, the XR6, XR6 Turbo and XR8.
The Falcon XR8 is now the only V8 model in the Falcon range. It's also the most powerful car out there, 290 kilowatts. That's 20 kilowatts more than the XR6 Turbo. In some ways, you wouldn't know it. It's actually more the torque in this. You floor it and it goes alright, it sort of kicks along, but it just doesn't have anything like the intensity of the turbo. Of course, it sounds like a V8. You can still hear plenty of that characteristic tone, but it just doesn't quite have that tough sound that you really hope this car would have. Which is weird, because Ford's put this thing in called a semi-active muffler, or a SAM. The idea is it actually bypasses one of the mufflers at certain engine revs and under certain conditions. Inside the car though, I'll tell you what, I'm struggling to pick when it's actually happening. It just sort of all sounds very similar and samey, but outside, where the car takes off from away from you, you can actually pick it. You can hear that noise and it does sound a bit bigger. I'm going to try it with the window down. It's not even that much better with the window down. You just don't get that real V8 feel that you expect from an Aussie muscle car. In fact, it even sounds quieter than the old XR8. As for the engine, well, it's a pretty familiar unit, the 5.4 litre V8, and it's actually exactly the same engine that was formerly reserved for the Falcon GT, the FPV lineup. Ford's plonked it straight into its flagship XR8, which of course means the GT takes another step up. And one of the things with the V8 and the Falcon is the engine doesn't quite fit unless you put that characteristic bonnet bulge. It's pretty cool though, a little reminder that you're actually in something a bit different. Now the suspension for the XR8, identical to the rest of the XR range, except they've got slightly stiffer front springs in it, basically because the engine is heavier. And sometimes you notice it. Push hard through corners and you can feel all that weight over the nose, just sort of leaning, sometimes pushing wide as you get a little bit enthusiastic. I'll tell you what though, you would have to be a major V8 fan to want to go for this, especially when there's something called the XR6 Turbo. Pretty much the standout of the XR range and the standout of the Falcon range is the XR6 Turbo. It's not only the fastest in the Falcon range, it's pretty much the fastest Australian muscle car ever. We've just timed it using satellite-based timing, and it did 100 k's an hour from rest in 5.1 seconds for a $45,000 car. The other great thing with the XR6 Turbo is it now picks up all the specification from the XR8. That means 18-inch wheels and plenty of other goodies. Despite being the fastest car in the Ford catalogue, the brakes on the XR6 Turbo are exactly the same as the model it replaces. But remember, they were updated a few years ago and they still work pretty well. In fact, the whole car works really well. Even on bumpy roads, it still rides reasonably well. And on a windy road, it's fantastic. It really gets along nicely. And it's sort of deceptive in its speed. Until you look down at the speedo sometimes, you realise how quick you're going and how quick it accelerates out of corners. And like all the Falcons, the XR6 Turbo feels a lot more cohesive inside. There's a lot more room for big blokes like me. You don't have this thing all coming down over your head. It's just a more comfortable place to be generally, and the attention to detail is a lot better. Also better use of materials and a better layout. But one of the best things with the XR6 Turbo is just the way it drives. You barely know it's a turbo. Squeeze the throttle, the power is there almost instantly. It's really good, and they've done a lot of work with the whole turbo plumbing, making it a lot neater under the bonnet. The intercooler is 50% bigger. It also sits now in the middle of the car, so when you're looking at it from the front, it's the only telltale that this is an XR6 Turbo, and it looks a lot neater. And the other thing is the exhaust note. It's got this really sort of deep growl and a bit of a burble when it changes gears. It sounds really good and characteristic, distinctive of the XR6 Turbo. And the XR is the only Falcon also available with a manual transmission. Now, we're driving the Auto here, and funnily enough, the Auto is actually pretty much the quickest car. There's not a whole lot between them. Through the gear changes, people generally think the Auto's quicker, but the manual also has now a launch control system where you can build up rev, build up boost, and basically drop the clutch. The car will look after the rest, make a perfect start for you. So there it is, the next step in the evolution of the Aussie muscle car with the all-new Ford FG Falcon XR range. Now, I've got to be honest, the XR8, not really for me. It's not that quick, it's just not that impressive. The biggest problem the XR8 has got is a thing called the Falcon XR6 Turbo. That car is absolutely fantastic. 0 to 100 in 5.1 seconds, $45,000, a true performance bargain. And it drives well, and it's well equipped. The regular XR6, also pretty good as well. A big step up for the Ford Falcon.